Alrighty guys, welcome back to another episode of Airtime with Jordan. I'm your host Jordan Fasso, and today on the pod we are going to be talking about the Richmond Tigers and giving their season preview for 2025. So, that being said, we're going to give a general structure again for those of you who haven't listened to any of the previews before this one. We've got a bit of a review of last year, then we're going to go through the ins and outs of the team from the offseason. Give my expectations just generally about the squad, some of the lineups, and how I think players are going to play and stuff like that. And then on the back of that, go through some specific players to watch for the year, whether they're going to break out or just a few things to note about them, and then finish off with where I think they'll end up based on my projections for the year in terms of their ladder position and their power ranking. So, with that being said, let's get stuck into the Tigers, and I think. Quickly on last year, they went 2-21, 18th on the ladder. Pretty long year for Tigers fans. The one sort of, good thing that they had was the Dusty Martin farewell match, specifically his 300th. It wasn't the easiest year to cheer as a Tigers fan, but I'm sure the 3 premierships in the last 5 years or so will definitely, sort of help that pain a little bit along the way. But as I said, it was a very long year for the Tigers fans. The remaining stars from their premiership years didn't really play enough or well enough when they were in to keep them afloat, and then it soon became apparent that this club was definitely headed for a full-scale rebuild, and that's pretty much the extent of their season. They had that really good win early on against the Swans up at the SCG, and then didn't really show much after that, and of course that was when they had a lot of their stars playing, so there's still a little bit of hope that they could be competitive, I guess, if they get everyone on the paddock. But I don't think that's the direction of this club at all. I don't think that those players are going to be motivated to do so. They're more in that mental state at the moment. So, I guess with that being said, there's not a heap to review from last year for the Tigers. We sort of know how they went, and I think let's just get straight into the ins and outs for them. And the talks of the ins and outs for the Tigers is just the pure amount of talent that they brought in through the draft. And starting off with Sam Lawler, number 1 overall pick, Josh Smiley, number 7, Taj Houghton, 12, Jonty Fowle, 14th, Luke Traynor, 21st, Harry Armstrong taking the 23rd pick, Thomas Sims at 28, and Jasper Algett at 58 as well. So a big influx of players through the draft, a lot of first and second round picks here for the Tigers, which is exactly what you want for a team that's bottomed out like the way they have last year. And on the outside, they had Liam Baker, of course, heading over to West Coast. Shea Bolton to Freo, Matthew Coulthard, Noah Cumberland, Jack Graham as well. Dylan Grimes, Dustin Martin, Marlon Pickett, all 3 of whom retired, as well as Sam Naismith as well. And then Dan Rioli, of course, heading to the Gold Coast Suns. So, a clear direction has been chosen by the Tigers based on their ins and outs for the off season, and everything coming in through the draft, and then everything going out is all just seasoned players retiring or getting traded for picks on the flip side of their careers. So overall, I think the Tigers made the absolute right calls in the off-season. They had tried to extend their window sort of unsuccessfully by bringing in, Taranto and Jacob Hopper as well in the previous few years. And I think that they saw the writing on the wall, and it's good management sort of prevailed in the end in cutting their losses and heading into a full-scale, rebuild. The full tilt rebuild, I guess. And I think more teams in general need to follow this method, and it's going to pay off in the long run for teams. The Tigers especially, they've timed this pretty well, and maybe their hand was sort of forced in that regard with the imminent addition of Tasmania coming into the league. So nonetheless, you've got to give the Tigers props for making the call to not just try and chase the mediocrity wheel that can be, some teams can get caught in at times. So I think that you've got to give them the props for having the gumption, I guess, to cut it all down and say goodbye to a few stars, which obviously hard to do, but I think it's for the best for the club in the long run and those players too. And just on the two of the stars that they did trade out in Dan Rioli and Shea Bolton in particular. I'll touch on those two because they're probably the most interesting ones to me anyway, that left in the off season. But I think Rioli, to get 2 first-round picks for Dan Rioli is, for a guy going into his age 28 season who, in my opinion, boosted his value a fair amount last year on a tanking team. It was an incredible value player by the Tigers. I don't think he's, I think at his best he's probably league average in terms of a half-back player, and he's been a reliable player for the Tigers, but just to get 2 first-round picks for him is just an incredible haul. I think well done to the Tigers on that regard. Just having a look at some of the guys that have returned close to 2 first-round picks amount of draft capital in trades in the last 6 years, there aren't many, and the only one actually that I could find, albeit I didn't have the longest time to look, but I did look, and it was Tim Taranto was the last one that did it, and the only one in the last 6 years as well that's netted 2 first-round picks. So I think Tim Taranto obviously a much bigger fish at the time than Dan Rioli by comparison. So I know that's kind of a weird one because the Tigers gave up the 2 first-round picks in that scenario, but you know what, they got them back for Dan Rioli, which I'd say that's a win anyway. And then you're looking at the other 2 guys that I saw that netted that sort of value in terms of draft capital, and Josh Dunkley was basically traded to the Lions for 1 first and 1 early second rounder. That was the other comparable one. And the other one was Jeremy Cameron, who, the Giants traded Jeremy Cameron for picks 13, 15 and 20. But they traded away Cameron and 2 seconds. So even there, you're getting better value for, in my opinion, you're probably getting better value for Rioli in terms of draft capital than the Giants got for Jeremy Cameron in his absolute prime. So that's just to put you in perspective on what the Richmond did with that trade, and that is an unbelievable haul by them. Well done. And Gold Coast, that sort of just exemplifies the amount of picks and things that they have to spare, and essentially they have draft capital to burn in a way with the access they get through their academy, and good on Richmond for having the guy that they wanted out of that, and maximising his value. And the fact that Dunkley and Cameron netted less than what Rioli did is just still mind-boggling, I think, for me. But anyway, I'll digress, and I'll move on to Shea Bolton a little bit here as well with that other trade that they did. And they gave away 3 first-round picks for Shea Bolton, essentially. Freo did. So I think that was a pretty good move by Richmond as well. The risk that Richmond sort of would have run if they let him go on another year is that maybe Shea Bolton's not as motivated. You're another year removed from that gloss of the premiership era that he started on the back end of, and he was, in my opinion, I think he's had a quiet decline since the premiership years, the back end of those premiership years anyway, with drop-offs in his overall efficiency, and also not to mention that he didn't even have a serious uptick in terms of his the amount of scoring he was providing the Tigers in terms of goals kicked and things like that per game. So I think when you combine those sort of things, those 2 things, that I think the allure of Shea Bolton is actually maybe a little bit higher than what he's actually providing on field, and maybe that's a motivation thing. Maybe he has a bit more to give than what he showed in his last few years at the Tigers, but regardless, I would be hesitant to say whether he's actually a driver of winning or more of an amazing complementary player when he's in a good team, which Freo absolutely, they need that icing on the top of the cake. They've got a good foundation already, and maybe Shea Bolton is that. But I think to cash in on Shea Bolton at that point in his career was a great move by the Tigers to get 3 first-round picks for him, and I think overall a win-win for both clubs, but especially considering I think there was a bit of downside to Richmond keeping him that maybe wasn't discussed that much last year, and I just wanted to I guess applaud them for making that call, because he was young enough to potentially keep for another tilted in 5 or so years, but I think that they made the absolute right call in this situation, cashing in on Bolton and Rioli. Now, as for my actual expectations for the Tigers this year, I think they're quite comfortably going to be the 18th team in the competition in terms of, no surprise, my power ranking and the ladder expectation. They're going to be down the bottom. I'd be shocked if they weren't, and it would only be a matter of some team getting a ridiculous injury run, I think, for that not to be the case. But, it might be a long year for some of the players on field, as I don't expect, as I said, too much on-field success, if any, but the fans are going to be a lot more receptive to this iteration of the Tigers, in my opinion, than last year's version, even though they had, I guess, the dusty farewell tour to a degree. But I think that like this sort of position to be in as a fan is a lot more enjoyable. And I've talked a little bit about being in football purgatory. We know the St Kilda and Essendon have been in that sort of cycle for a few years now, and I think that the moves that the Tigers made in the off season will circumvent that sort of situation from happening to them specifically. And we saw it with the recent Tigers dynasty and the Hawks one before that. The best way to build a consistent contender year in year out for a sustained period is to bottom out, accumulate picks, and gather a core of those players to grow together, in my opinion. And now you still have to, of course, hit on those players and generate a successful culture, of course, because you can't just have an endless cycle of draft picks that aren't improving, that aren't coming into a good culture and driving winning. I think we saw that for a long time at Melbourne before they finally got over the hump. We saw that with Gold Coast as well, so let's see if they improve this year on that. But I think it can go one or two ways. You still have to hit on those players and build a culture as well. Which, I don't know, we'll say that for another day, but I don't think Melbourne necessarily did. So, I think Richmond have the blueprint. They know what they did the first time to build that dynasty in their most recent dynasty anyway. And I think that, easier said than done, but they know the importance of that anyway. And I think just from a general watchability standpoint as a fan, it's so much more enjoyable knowing that you're shit when you have young, talented players in the pipeline than when you are average and have no future. It's always fun to watch, for me at least, for glimpses for the young players. And personally, when Hawthorn on the back in from 2017 to 2021 or so, it was 2022 probably even. It was pretty grim to watch as a fan when you're just in that like sort of mediocre position where you know threat and don't necessarily have the fun of having young top draft picks to watch either, or not even top draft picks, just like top young talented players. So I think that once you start getting those players through the door, you can sort of start to envision what the next iteration of your next premiership team is going to look like, and become attached to those players as a fan as well. So again, I think they've just made all the right calls in the off season, and hopefully for the Tigers' sake, that they can actually build on developing these players now. And I think that sort of leads me into my actual expectations for the year, and that's all you're really hoping for, is that the young guys show signs, they develop, and they don't look completely out of place. Last year they already had a few guys who showed signs of being potentially in their next premiership winning side. In my opinion, I think there's three guys in particular that I think could be that, in Jacob Bauer, Tom Brown, and Ben Miller. I think that all three of those guys showed enough to think that they're going to be role players at a minimum for a few years to come. And I think that those are the three that I'd mainly look at. The remainder of the list is probably a bit more in flux. I don't think there's necessarily guys that are going to break out or be in that next major Richmond team. But the addition of all these draftees plus potentially another influx at the next draft should see the Tigers start to fill out the core of their next premiership team soon. And as for on-field this year, the one concern I do have is if their remaining senior players are actually able to stay on the field. Last year, 4 games out of Tom Lynch is just not enough. 12 from Jacob Hopper, 13 from Dion Prestia, 15 from Taranto. That's not enough from those guys to obviously I think they were trying to win going into last year, which is sort of shifted their objective, I guess, halfway through the year with all those injuries. But I think you still got 22 plus games from Nathan Broad, Nick Vlosten, and Jaden Short as well. So I think that's the sort of benchmark that those older guys should be trying to set. They should be coming in and trying to get as many games into themselves this year as possible, and taking these are the guys that you're relying on to ensure that they can provide on-field guidance and coaching to the young players, which should help accelerate their development in theory. And that's sort of the importance of them being out there. And what you don't want is those senior guys being injured, leaving the first year guys to defend for themselves, which I think has a genuine sort of disaster potential, not just for this year, but also like their general development and confidence. We saw what happened, it's a long time ago now, but probably 15 years ago or so ago, to Jack Watts. He was sort of the poster child for that, where all these expectations placed on a player, and they don't have the they don't have the infrastructure around him to allow him to play a small role. They just threw him in the deep end, and we saw it happen there, and it's happened countless other times as well with players over the journey. So, I think that's why it's important for those guys to play as much as they can this year, despite the, sort of outlook that they're going to have a pretty down year in terms of win total anyway. And I think, the drop-off after their senior players, the senior guys, is probably as dire as it gets in the league, which is, it's expected given that they were chasing premierships for so long and not prioritising getting games into their younger guys who are now in that 25, 26 sort of range, maybe even a bit younger than that. But there is a genuine void between those top senior guys of the list and the draftees coming in from this year. Like, there's a bit of a black hole in their list in that regard. So if you're getting injuries to these senior players, then that middle generation has to potentially step up, which is sort of the concerning part for me. There isn't much talent in that group as I see it anyway, and I'm sure there's some players that might change my opinion on that, but making that group having to do the heavy lifting in that scenario, we could end up seeing a few ugly 100 plus point losses occurring. So hopefully that doesn't happen, and the fans get an enjoyable year and get a balance between seeing some of their premiership stars and your Hoppers and Tarantos in the twilight. Maybe a bit early to call it twilight for those guys particularly, but Lynch and stuff and Prestia maybe in the twilight of their careers, sort of guiding in that next brigade into the league. And I think for me, the players to watch, I think it's going to be the young guys. It's going to be the first round draft picks, and Sam Lawler is the obvious one. Number one pick. It's hard to not discuss him to some degree, and I think everyone's sort of talked about the Dustin Martin comparison, that ability to play forward and in the midfield, and shows great strength for a young player as well. He looks probably as physically ready as you could be compared to most first year players, especially midfielders. So I think the other one is Josh Smiley. He's a big mid at 195 centimetres, and I think I like that archetype a lot. We're seeing how important it is. You got Paddy Cripps, you got Bontempelli, you got Tom Green. All three are just like incredible midfielders. Those big 194 centimetre guys who are just hard to tackle for the other midfielders, I guess, and it's an important role to play. And I think the exciting thing for Josh Smiley is he has Tim Taranto there. While I don't think Tim Taranto is at the absolute top of those big midfielder rankings, like, to be able to learn from him and go up against someone of that quality is still exciting for Richmond to have that player of that mould for him to follow. And then the other one is Harry Armstrong as well. He fell quite a bit in the draft, and he was touted as the number one key forward. So to get him at 23 in the draft for a team in need of their next spearhead was great value, and hopefully he can show some of the flashes that you'd hope for from a young key forward. I wouldn't necessarily expect him to be tearing games apart by any means, but the main thing is to look for how many contests he's getting to, and not even necessarily marking and completing those contests, but just getting to the contests and competing as well as he can. So and similar to Josh Smiley, he has the blueprint of Tom Lynch there. So that's again important as to why I think Tom Lynch needs to stay on the field this year in particular, just to provide a bit of value up forward for the Tigers, and especially for Harry Armstrong. It could be very important in his development this year and taking some of that pressure off. So I think I haven't got the most extensive thoughts on the Tigers. I think most of it revolved around the direction that the club went in the off-season, and as you should probably get the gist, I'm pretty high on how they handled that. I think that's as I said, most teams should be, when they're starting to fall off in that way, and you're not a Geelong or a Sydney who can somehow keep topping up and staying up the top, that this is absolutely the way to go. Especially with Tasmania coming into the league. So it's going to be interesting to see if anyone else sort of thinks of that same direction the next year or so while they have the chance. And just on the ladder projection, as I said, there's not a whole lot of detail going in here. I'm penciling them in, I'm sharpieing them in for 18th this year. I'd be shocked if that doesn't happen, but it's not a bad thing for the Richmond fans. They've had enough success over the last few years. I think they can deal with another wooden spoon and another number one pick. So enjoy the ride, Richmond fans. It's going to be a fun year watching your young players, so I'll definitely be keeping an eye on them as well. So keen to talk about them at some point and see how they're going, and which of the young brigade are sort of breaking out, so to speak. So yeah, stay tuned for that. We'll do some more Richmond content during the year. I won't forget about you guys. Alrighty, catch you guys.